One. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to The Insider. This week, I'm delighted to be joined by Derek Ewing. Derek is the CTO of a company called Kite Edge. Almost got it wrong there. Hi there, Derek. How are you?
I'm very good. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for coming on the show. I could never do an intro justice, to be honest with you. Could you please give the listeners a bit of an overview of who you are and where you are?
Yeah, of course. So as you mentioned, Derek Ewing, CTO of Kite Edge. Kite Edge is a startup that I guess is transitioning from kind of early seed stage going into the early parts of Series A. And we have built a number of products, obviously using cloud and AI and something called ontologies to help business users in the asset management industry find useful information in large data sets that they've already got access to.
Cool. So Kite Edge, I believe it was founded in about 2016. How many heads are you at the moment?
Yeah, absolutely. So it was, I guess, startups, and from my experience at least, is it starts off very slowly and then the pace kind of increases. So we started off, it was James Flavin, the CEO, Neil Scarth, the chairman, and we've been working together since 2016, I think 2016 June time. And it was really taking that idea and turning the idea into something that's actually kind of product that people can make use of. And so the company size has kind of grown and shrunk as a function of the investment. This is a really interesting, I guess, change for me in that usually in banking, I work in finance, you get your budget at the beginning of the year, you hire your team and off you go, you've got a 12-month runway and everything's very clear, you just got to focus on delivering. In startups, you get a little bit of investment at the beginning part of the year, and then you get a big chunk maybe in Q2, then you hire people, then you have to let people go, you bring on contracts, so much more dynamic. I think we've had about 12 people in the tech team at the kind of peak, and then we kind of shrink all the way down to kind of 3-4 people when we want to kind of preserve the runway.
So I guess on the plus side, where we are right now with COVID, are you guys normally in office space, or are you remote normally, or?
Yeah, no, very much remote. I mean,
yeah, it works out, I guess, with what's happening where we are. You guys haven't had to, sorry to jump in, but like speak to some customers, and it's just a massive change and the massive headache. And, it took an initial, I guess, good month to get everyone settled from home and looking after mental health and making sure that they've got the right setup and all that kind of jazz. Smaller, leaner businesses have obviously been able to adapt quite quickly. So I guess that's been quite positive.
Well, yeah, I think, I mean, as a way of working, a way of operations, I'm not necessarily a big supporter, but I think people can work from anywhere in the world. We've always had these tools available, and my tech teams have always been using them. So things like Slack and Jira and Get, etc. I can see what people are doing. They're checking in code, and we're constantly getting messages. One of my AI developers works. He's nocturnal. He sends me messages at 3 a.m. and he kind of expects answers back at 3 a.m. And so our lead architect, Dev, is in Berlin. So he works in Berlin. He used to fly over every 3 or 4 weeks when that makes sense. When it makes sense to have a face-to-face meeting, if you need a workshop in a room,
exactly,
usually an all-day thing. So he's quite happy to fly over. Our UI developers up in Sheffield. We've got another AI developer that's in Reading. So people are distributed. And I'm much more focused on the individuals that have the skills to do the job. Than their location. We'll make it work for whoever we need to make it work for.
That's fantastic. Listen, it's a really hot topic. Taylor and my team actually posted over the weekend about this, and there's some really good interaction on LinkedIn about people discussing it. And last week I spoke to candidates who are in the market for new opportunities, but where COVID's hit, they've gone and one of them was working in Greece, but just like literally just shifted out to Greece and he was working on the beach. Another chap was doing the same in Sweden. I think he's a Swedish national, so I think he went to basically stay with family, but it hadn't affected their day because they'd already been told that they're not going back to the office anytime soon. I think every company is different. I think you're right about the workshops. I speak to kind of software engineers and architects, and I think a lot of the time people say, you can't explain things as well when you're not, in the office. But and I think you miss sometimes the softer conversations, the more kind of like informal ones, maybe don't get that bit. So there's loads of, obviously, the massive pros and cons, but the most important thing is you're right that it's getting the right people for the job. I think that this has changed the landscape, forever. I think if remote working is important for people moving forward, then they'll always will, and it's the most important thing, they will always be able to get that now, in my opinion. So it's good that you guys are embracing and working the right way. Interested in finding out a little bit more about the product. So am I right in saying that is the product that you guys have called Phoenix? Obviously, there's lots of different elements to it.
So we've got two products. One is called Apex, which is the bespoke search engine. Another one is called Peak, which is a PDF extraction engine. And then we've got this kind of more ambitious vision where we'd like to make Peak much more intelligent. At the moment, it's kind of configured as a search engine. It's got all of the kind of synonyms and all of the features that you'd expect from a search engine that's tuned for the asset management industry. However, we've got this asset management ontology, which is really the domain knowledge from all the kind of asset managers to understand what are the important investment factors when making a decision. And then that's a really interesting space in asset management. It's going through a kind of I guess you could call it a transformation or turmoil, depending on which side you sit in. And they really need to make better use of the information that they had available to them. So there's something called Flowmageddon, where most of the investment is coming from active management, where you have asset managers moving your investments around, to passive management. And it's kind of been shown over the last 10 years, something called Flowmageddon, that a lot of the investment money is moving into these passive funds, which is bad news for asset managers, because those are the people that are supposed to be managing these large buckets of funds. And yeah, I guess they're under pressure to show their value. So really great for a company like Kite Edge, because we can take all this information in and ensure that they're getting the best value from all of that information. What was historically happening in that industry is that 95% of the content that they received, they didn't necessarily read, because it's just too much. I mean, you'll know yourself, I look in my inbox, I've got 24,000 emails for the last week. I'm never going to be able to read 24,000. I look in my accountant's folder and I look at anything that comes from some of the C-suites, and everything else I don't really look at. And my team know if they want to get a hold of me, they get me on a text message or they get me on Slack, and I'll pick it up there. If it comes into my inbox, you're going to have to chase 2 or 3 times. And in fact, I think we had a similar challenge getting time for this interview.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm swamped. There is literally just too much information out there nowadays, and it's really difficult it's really easy for people to get distracted, and it's really easy for people to miss some key piece of information. And that information might be a single sentence in a 40-page document, and they're never going to see it. They're never going to find it. People don't have time to sit down and read all the documents they've sent. So asset managers have got both internal research and external research, and they need to be able to effectively parse it very quickly and efficiently and make big investment decisions. The portfolio managers I've been speaking to over the last couple of weeks, they make trades in the order of kind of 200 million upwards. So those are significant investments, and they may only be making 4 or 5 trades a week, 4 or 5 trades a month, but they're big investments. And those investments, if they don't make money, that impacts a pension fund. That's a large number of people's pensions, and so they're kind of serious decisions, and they need to make sure that they've got all the information available to them and make best use of that, understand what people are doing, and they don't want to follow the crowd, because the crowd can often go in the wrong direction. And so our platform allows them to kind of feed in all of that content, whether it be news, whether it be independent research, whether it be internal documents from their analysts, and then just analyze that and say, what am I seeing? If someone's made a buy recommendations from one of the banks, they'd say, okay, do I agree with that? What were the factors that influenced that buy decision? And they can go away and do those searches and find those subsections of documents that help them understand what they should do.
No, amazing. It sounds very interesting, actually. In terms of, it's right in our space as well. You know, when you're talking about kind of AI products at the moment, I think, you know, when you look at where our trends as a recruitment agency have been over the last year, has been working more and more within kind of data and data-driven decisions, and having companies using the right kind of technology and products to enable them to do that. And I think it's just the way things are going. What's the kind of future hold then? So you guys, I guess there's a specific kind of asset management businesses you work with, and it's just purely for that industry. So I guess how's the kind of next, I guess, year looking for you guys now?
So we're, I guess, quietly confident, possibly verging on arrogant. So we have a complete ontology, and we've integrated it with search. And I guess we're out of the technology testing, and we're actually testing it with business customers now. So when one of these asset managers puts a search into the system, they get a result back, and they're going to say, that's relevant to what I'm doing, but I didn't search for any of those words or any of those concepts, but the system somehow knew that it was related to what I was looking at. And that's kind of a magical experience, and so that's fantastic. So that kind of proves the concept to say that this works. In the longer term, you can plug in more ontologies. So if I wanted to plug in the pharma, the legal ontology, the defense, in fact, we had a conversation with a company that had a large number of defense ontologies and said, can we plug our defense ontologies in? That was a couple of years back, and we said, we're not quite ready for that yet. We're kind of working on asset management. And so in the longer term, much more broadly available. So we effectively would like to not necessarily be Google, but this should become a kind of a common capability within any technology. So although we've got a search engine just now, we'd like to plug that, what we call kind of relative relevance, and into other systems. And so many of the asset managers, they already have technologies, and so they don't necessarily want to have another UI and another tool thing to log into. But we've got all this obviously exposed as APIs, microservice architecture, all kind of modern technologies, all in the cloud, all with CI/CD, and so we can plug into other systems. And our core competence is finding content that's relevant to that user at that particular time. And the way that we do that is very unique. And so plugging that capability into other systems in other domains is absolutely kind of longer term plan. And really it's about getting people access to the relevant information in large sets of data. Yeah.
Well, no. I think it's just as you're saying. I'm thinking over the years, I've worked with so many companies that have are similar in many respects from a startup perspective, who will go into one specific industry, but ultimately when they're kind of talking to you about what it does, you always think, well, that could also work in in healthcare. This could work in it. Like, I remember just a couple of examples off the top of my head, like businesses that were doing some technology in the legal function. You think, okay, legal, kind of more kind of like and you just think, well, that's in every industry. So you can, and it was, and as things have turned out, this company have developed over the years, and I think that's something I wanted to pick up with you. But James and I, we're very lucky. Where we've been in recruitment now for 15 odd years. Typically, what happens with us, and I think that our relationship and this conversation has come around of my business partner. We over the last 15 years, we'll speak to technologists and engineers or managers, what have you, and then ultimately, a lot of the time, they'll go on to be involved in startups, and that's how we'll always get some business and interaction and understand and work closely with startup businesses. And I enjoy it. It's very exciting work with startups. But at the same time, there's many challenges working with startups. And I'm really interested to kind of get your opinions on, and any help. Don't forget, there's a lot of people out there right now that COVID's given an opportunity for people to think about what they're doing next, and maybe seen, there'll be a lot of entrepreneurs, I think, that will come off the back of this, who will be thinking of ideas and thinking of products, and maybe thinking, is it time to start a business, and can I get the funding? And I think you're a good guy to kind of talk about this, because it sounds like you've had challenges over the years from a startup perspective and getting funding. Any advice for anybody at the moment thinking of maybe starting a business or in the early stages?
Yeah, I get it. So one of the things that I kind of started doing when COVID kind of came up is, because I've been a CTO, there's other companies reaching out to me. Sometimes they're kind of quite often smaller companies, small startups, and they're saying, we've got the business side taken care of. We don't really have the funding for a CTO, but we kind of like to have an ongoing dialogue. And so it becomes a kind of advisory conversation. And I've done quite a few of those now. And there seems to be, I guess, different groups that they fall into. I mean, just obviously from more of a kind of cliched perspective, if you're starting a business, you have to have a kind of absolute passion. You have to feel that this is something that's important to you and to the world, and have a kind of greater purpose, and that will give you the motivation to keep going, even when you have, I guess you could call tough times coming all different forms. The people that you work with, I guess the founders, you're going to have disagreements. They're going to want to go in directions. You're going to want to go in different directions, and you have to be able to have that constructive conversation with your founders. So founders hugely important, and having that passion for building something and giving it to the kind of wider world. That's fundamentally important. In terms of funding is I guess a really interesting space. There are lots of different types of people in that ecosystem. So you'll have angel investors, you'll have ultra high net worths, you'll have your VCs. Angel investors, I'll start with the VCs. So my experience with VCs, kind of rightly or wrongly, is they want to keep an eye on everything that's happening, all the early stage startups. They want to have them on their books, and they maybe have 100 or 1,000 startups on there, and they're going to watch them over time to see if what they're saying is what they're delivering over time. So that just to build up that level of credibility, build up that level of knowledge. And at some point, once you've got a product and once you've got customers, VCs will come in and inject cash and grow your business. But really, in the first couple of years, VCs will entertain conversations, but it doesn't mean to say they're going to invest directly. And I think a lot of people, that's a big learning point. A lot of those other startups I spoke to thought they were going to roll into a VC office, get 20 million funding, start hiring a big team, and off they go. That's just not the way it happens. And the VCs won't necessarily tell you that, I guess, straight off the bat, that they're going to kind of keep you warm, keep those conversations active. Angel investors, they have much smaller amounts of investment. They kind of vary, and so you have to do a lot of work to build relationships and get that money coming in, and then you need to work on building that kind of constant cash flow. It needs to be kind of drip feeding in, and then your ultra high net worth. So my wife actually worked with another startup that was pretty successful, and I see a kind of common trend when you have kind of one or two ultra high net worths that also have a kind of shared passion, shared vision, and they just want to make something happen. They can put large chunks of funding in. So when you have a problem, you want to go away and do a piece of research, or you want to buy a product or buy a license, or that there are certain hurdles that you get to, and you can kind of innovate and you can play with ideas, but at some point you're going to need a chunk of cash, and that might be 10k, 50k, whatever it is, and you having that ultra high net worth come in, you go sit down, you have that conversation, and be open and honest with the investors and say, look, this is where we are, this is the plan, this is the roadmap. If we did this, we can do X, Y, and Z. And so you've got all those conversations, they're all happening in the first year. And then in the background, you still have to build your product, you still have to run your tech team, you still have to keep on track to your vision. It's very easy to get pulled off track. So juggling all those balls and all those conversations, it takes a lot of, I guess, practice and experience.
Yeah, listen, I've been involved now in 3 startup businesses. Obviously, not kind of technical or product related. Although we started a technical consultancy on, it's a joke. We started it on April the 1st, which, you know, ironically we must joke about being April Fools because, you know, where we are with COVID right now. But it's I absolutely agree with you in terms of kind of having a passion and, you know, and the purpose. And believe. And I think when I started Tech Intellect, I'd been stung in my last business that I started up. It's quite hard for me to kind of like find the energy to kind of go again. But then realistically, I was never going to be able to go back and work in another corporation. And I was always kind of destined to start up. And then you're right, the challenges that you get from, you know, I still enjoyed doing the day job. James definitely does. He does it more than I. But I think in terms, you know, the different challenges that come along just with staff or whatever it might be, you know, you they'll always blindside you, so you never know. But I always think that, like, within technology and startup, London, around the Shoreditch area, there's so many. I get very excited when I hear a company that I haven't heard about before. Basically, if I speak to a candidate or I know a candidate and I see he's gone somewhere, I'm like, who are they? Like, and I love to kind of research. Yeah, and like, who are these guys and what's the situation? But how do you see them becoming? How do you think the kind of investment market? When I say investment market, I'm talking about for startups, for people to, you know, angel investors, whatever it might be. Do you think that companies are now seeing this as an opportunity, or do you think that people are actually looking, no, we're going to hold off investing at the moment?
Yeah, I definitely, I think there's been a definite hesitation in the startup. I just wanted to go back to something you said. It was a bit of kind of touch base with me. It's a kind of double-edged sword. Once you start doing this, running your own startup, doing your own business, etc., I guess you get a taste of it. It becomes very real. And so the decisions you make are you make the wrong decision, you go out of business. You make the wrong decision, you build the wrong product, or you burn the relationship. That's kind of exciting, but I guess somewhat dangerous as well. You're going to learn your lesson pretty quickly. In that corporate world, it's a very safe environment. Make a mess of something, you get your wrap in the knuckles, you get your budget for next year, and you kind of carry on, and you've got a nice, steady, stable income. But once you've done the startup space, going back to that kind of corporate world, it's it becomes much more less interesting, less exciting, and I guess that's where the passion for the corporate job may start to struggle. And so I can absolutely understand once you've started doing this, you kind of want to get up and go for it. Going on to the investment side of things, I think there's a line, or at least there was a line back in the kind of Q2 of this year, where, and it seems that the UK government and the British Business Bank, I think we're entertaining lots of conversations in different industries, one of them being the startup space, and the UK government has to understand what's the impact of the economic impact of COVID. And startups are, I think, I guess, one of the really important parts of the British economy. And way back in 2008, remember the big economic recession back then, one of the think tanks kind of said that we will recover from the recession, but the thing that will kind of set us apart from other countries, the thing that will ensure our longevity economically, is innovating and sparking innovation. And you've seen that the government really put out lots of initiatives. That the way that I understand the government to work is they don't necessarily go out and just start doing things on their own. What they try to do is stimulate corporations or individuals to go down a particular direction. And so they really pushed the kind of term innovation. And you've seen that popping up 2009, 2002. It came across every industry, every company. Innovation was a core part of their kind of values. And so that really spawned the startup ecosystem. It really it was always there before, but just got much bigger. And anyone that had a kind of idea, or they were kind of encouraged to follow their dreams and do startups. That worked well. But I think there are a couple of challenges in that space. One is that not every idea necessarily should lead on to a company. You've got lots of what I call kind of vanity startups, things that seemed like a good idea, and probably are a good idea, but I guess the kind of economic return or the particular market wasn't ready for that or whatever. So you've got lots of companies being started, which is great because you need diversity, you need new ideas, you need fresh thinking, you need different people operating in different roles. So it's good, but obviously there should be a kind of natural evolution, and so those VCs and angel investors have due diligence processes, and that should kind of filter the ideas that are good ideas, but perhaps not good enough to grow up and become a great business. And so that was kind of there. The other thing that I think happened is, if you're going over to Silicon Valley, that's kind of the prototypal ecosystem for startups, and they throw around, you go in there with a PowerPoint and you can get big amounts of investment, and yeah, it seems like a bit of a kind of crazy world over there, much less risk averse, whereas in UK and in Europe, investors are have a different risk appetite. So they're less willing to invest in some sort of kind of blue sky idea. Blue sky ideas are the ones that often go kind of exponential growth. But obviously, everything you invest, you could potentially lose, and it's only maybe 1 in 10, 1 in 100 that go down that direction. And so I think what we ended up creating is an ecosystem of companies, and not just the startups that are involved here. You've got investment companies, and there's investors, and there are events that go on. I remember James, Neil, and I, we went around, and every week we had 2 or 3 pitches at some event. Lots of those events were interesting. A lot of them practice at pitching to understand what people want to hear. And so there was a big ecosystem that got created, and I think that's evolved over the last 2 or 3 years. And I think that means that it's about getting your message in front of the right people. So I think that now that ecosystem's evolved, you've got the opportunity to go and pitch and present your ideas to a wide variety of investors. And so we work in the kind of capital markets, fintech, regtech space. So we're talking to people that invest in that space.
Yeah.
And so I think the thing that really holds startups up is making sure that your message is reaching the right people. And so it's difficult to navigate all of those different events and all those different kind of places, and make sure that you're advertising your product and your idea and your vision in the right space. And I think the first 12 months to 18 months is just startups refining their messaging and making sure that messaging gets to the right people.
I think it's interesting from a recruitment perspective as well. I think when you speak to if you're an engineer, software engineer, for example, data engineer, whatever it might be, I think a lot of the time, I would say that candidates like startups and want to work in startups. I think they find it exciting. I think they enjoy the challenge of being involved in something from scratch and having a vision. I'll be really interested. I haven't had enough business in the last month, I guess, to kind of make an assumption on this yet. But it'd be interesting to see if that remains kind of in the next kind of 6 months, because candidates might look at this and say, hey, I'd prefer stability in this market. So I think it's a funny one, and it's fascinating to discuss with you, because I hope that we can. I'd like to have a situation where there's more startups off the back of this. If they can get investment, I think this is a great opportunity for people to kind of take stock of where they are, come up with ideas, be innovators, and move forward and grow. So I think it's so dependent on where we end up with COVID, I guess. But I would like to see that this would even create even more startups over the next couple of years. So I'd be interested.
Yeah, no, I hope so. I mean, fundamentally, I think, I guess at that kind of high abstract level, I think that human beings have a limited capacity to solve complicated problems. So we've done that over the years in academia, and we bring multidisciplinary teams together. But if you look at kind of governments and you look at large organizations, anything over kind of 4, 5, 6,000 people, they become less efficient as they grow. And you see that in the banks, where we say they're too big to fail, but it's really difficult to organize all of those banks. You get different types of banks: wealth management, investment management, retail banking. And it's, as the number of people increase, it becomes very difficult to operate effectively. And I think a lot of the large organizations, I guess, are struggling with that. We've seen some of that back in IBM, maybe, I don't know, 30, 40 years ago when they came out with, they got large companies and they used to put memos out that were kind of this big that people had to read through. And they came up with new methodologies and new approaches for solving big, complicated problems that involve large groups of people. And I think this plays nicely into startups. My view is that small teams, 10, 20, 30 people, that do a specific thing, do it very well, very efficiently, but they don't do everything. They interact with another company. So you see this when you're doing outsourcing. So maybe something like HR, for example, HR becomes an outsourced capability. Maybe marketing becomes an outsourced capability. But all those companies, they get very good at doing one specific thing, and then they interact with each other. And so that ecosystem of companies or capabilities interact with each other in a kind of very well kind of defined way. And you've got, in software terminology, we call it contracts and interfaces. And so if we can replicate that line of thinking in the workplace and with companies, yeah, I think we're already seeing that works better than having 10,000, 20,000 employees. Working in HSBC, we had, I think it was 140,000 people, and you could see duplication and triplication of work and roles and responsibilities. There are economies of scale, and so I guess one of the things that I found very interesting is the way that large organizations work really reflect, I guess, the kind of thinking of the kind of 1940s and 1950s large corporations. A lot of the theory that's taught to managers in MBA courses or business management, etc., comes from that kind of 1940s, 1950s. And the new kind of nuggets come from tech companies. So you see places like Microsoft and Google, they split it down into smaller teams and have this. And so there are things, new metrics, whether it be quarterly business reviews and KPIs, the little pieces that kind of come out of those tech companies, and they try to spread those into the corporates. But I really think, again, it comes back in terms of back to recruitment, finding the right people for the right job in a startup that is, I guess, more difficult, because in a large corporation, you're a small cog in a big machine, and you've got a very well-defined role. So I'm a UX developer, and all I ever do is UX. My UX developer does a lot more than just UX. He's doing cloud deployments, etc. And so it's a complicated question, and I think that's the type of technology that we have would allow recruiters to do a complicated search to say, I've got these 20 things I'm looking for. It doesn't all have to be in one individual. I need a combination of individuals with a combination of skills, and I need to find that team. It's a really difficult thing in recruitment to do, because obviously you've got the kind of CV, and then you've got to kind of test your candidates, etc. And you haven't said, this is my job spec, and your job spec's got five things on it, and they need to do these 5 things. That approach, I think, is very kind of serial and a little bit on the old school. You need to understand the company, and this is
Absolutely,
where when I worked with James, your partner, he's very flexible. I had a conversation with him, 15, 20 minutes. He said, Derek, I don't really understand what you're looking for. We spoke a little bit about the business. We spoke a little bit about where we are. He says, okay, I understand what you're looking for. And he went off, and I think 4 out of the 5 people he recommended, we hired. And in reality, he provided 3 people for every role. And I could have selected any one of those. That didn't come from me giving him a job spec with boxes to check to say they need this skill, this skill, this skill. That came from the conversation that James and I had, to understand the business and understand what we're looking for. He would then do that assessment. So it's a much more complicated combination. If you had something like Apex and you plug that into all of the kind of recruitment databases, you could put that query in, and it would say these things are related. The person might not have had exactly the history you're looking for, but they've got all of the relevant skills.
So I mean, I could talk about this all day. There's lots of new technologies that come out in the recruitment industries, and I get approached all the time, and some of them sound quite cool. A lot of AI tech, a lot of things become more automated, but you'll never lose the human touch. And that's a good story about James. You'll like that, but it's true. We often say a culture of a business, but we often say a culture within a culture, because you can have a startup business of 10, 12 people, but then your developers of 2 or 3 could have a different kind of mentality if they work in different countries, for example, like yours, to your sales function to whatever else. So, and it's really understanding that, and I think that's where we only really partner with a small a handful of businesses, and whereas as much as we're keen to grow, we've got a very particular methodology of how we recruit. It's quite hard when you start engaging with a new customer to say, this is the way that we do it, and kind of like, we want more time. And You know, I had a job spec the other week, and it was just I wouldn't start recruiting it until I'd spoken to the manager. You know, and because otherwise especially in this market, you don't want to waste time. You don't want to start sending through CVs. Like, oh, okay, he hasn't got this, or hasn't got that. Listen, I don't want to take up any more of your time. I know you're really busy guy. I've really enjoyed the conversation. It's fascinating I haven't really spoken to somebody, a CTO of a startup, especially, and it's great to see. I love talking to you because I can tell your passion, and it's somebody, you know, you're somebody who's worked in that corporate world and kind of taken that and put it into a startup, and obviously had some big challenges over the last couple of years. So it's really, like I say, it's fascinating to discuss with you. I know you're a very busy guy, but if there's anybody else out there at the moment who's in a similar situation, you okay to, because I'm obviously going to tag you on LinkedIn, you want people to look like quickly reach out to connect with you, to maybe ask a question or two?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So this is, I think I form views and opinions, and it's very easy for me to operate in a small bubble based on my experiences. And I think that having those conversations, so all of those advisory roles that I've done in the past, yeah, I enjoy those. I look at different angles. Does it agree or does it conflict with some of my ideas? And that really helps me evolve my understanding of a market. And so I think that's a bi-directional thing. I learn something, they can pick up some of my experience. So yeah, absolutely happy to have those conversations.
Thank you so much. Listen, I really appreciate your time. We're going to speak very soon, I'm sure. And good luck with the future and all the further developments at Kite Edge.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
All the best.
Take care. Bye.